So excited. We've got another installment of Breakthrough Chronicles. And as I promised early on, we are going to have a very diverse group of people that we talk to here on Breakthrough Chronicles. And this is a gentleman that I have watched from afar and up close and have been so fascinated by his work, who he is, and to have him now sitting to my left is an absolute thrill. You might recognize the face. Face made for the camera. You see, he looks into that camera, and you're like, oh, I know that face. Mike Watkiss.
Mugshot.
Please turn to the left, sir. How are you?
Oh, it's so nice to see you. And I know that you've had a really heavy evening flying in from Salt Lake City after that double overtime. So thank you for this invitation.
Well, it's an invitation that I have wanted to extend for a while, and creating this platform provides me a great excuse for us to get together. It's funny, we have kind of walked in the same world for so many years, but we've never really had a chance to connect in person.
We were talking to some of your guys in your crew here, young guys in the business, and it is a small community that people who sort of do what we do. And whether you know them personally, you have certainly crossed paths at multiple times.
Right.
And it's the same thing, we're such Suns fans that you and Eddie are in our living room every night with us, Ann and the team. And we just think, so you develop a personal connection with people you see on television, and then working in the industry, there is that, cross paths frequently. So,
right.
Over the many years, how many times we've been in the same room together, but sort of moving in different directions.
Moving in different directions. Back in the days when I was at KTAR, I'm sure you were probably across the studio talking with Preston or Pat
or one of those guys,
somebody about one of the numerous
characters.
Stories. 40 years in the TV news industry, 20 years of that having spent here locally in the Phoenix market. And for some of you younger viewers, I would strongly suggest going to YouTube, doing the search for Mike Watkiss. Now, we've got his book here. It is Story Hustler, Murder, Mayhem, PTSD. So see, just that alone, I know you're all racing to the search button right now because you want to know what that is all about. We're going to get more into the book a little bit later on. But, the fact that you have covered such a vast array of American news history, it's really mind-boggling. But I want to jump back and take me to 9-year-old Mike Watkiss. The first time you looked into that camera, it was a local TV commercial in Salt Lake City. Right?
Yeah, they needed a kid with braces to smile on camera. The setting was a loan company, and parents sitting at the kitchen table struggling with bills. And suddenly now they got to pay for their kids' braces, and on cue, I sort of needed to sit there and smile. So that was my one big break.
So it was a non-speaking part?
Non-speaking part, yeah. I'm hoping that I captured that moment, though, that the essence of that moment non-verbally. But, it has set me on the course of a rather checkered performance and broadcast and acting career.
Well, yeah. So we'll get into the acting side of it as well. For those of you who don't know, beyond the journalism and reporting and multi-time award winner as well. But acting, so we're going to jump into that. But so
you flatter me to call some of that acting, but thank you. So
there are credits.
That.
So there
they were acting. Credits. Yes, they're IMDb. Yes, it's there.
But how did you, as a 9-year-old, make that decision? And I'm sure it's partly parent-based as well.
Well, actually, it was my orthodontist. I think the production company said, we need a kid that we can put on camera and will be smart enough to smile on cue. And I guess I met that bare threshold of talent. And I think I probably owe my acting career to my orthodontist.
Well, there you go.
People start in this business in really weird ways.
Long time overdeserved or underdeserved credit, however you want to put that. But father was an attorney.
Yes, sir.
You're the youngest of three.
Yeah.
All boys.
Yeah.
And
I was sort of the afterthought screw up.
Because your two older brothers went into law.
They
correct?
both followed my father into law, and he was quite, for his generation, was a pretty distinguished lawyer. And both of them had been lawyers, but I realized that that was probably not my path.
Right. When did you realize? Because I feel like there's an influence from mom in there in terms of your personality and makeup kind of combined with.
My mother was a lovely, very giving, just generous person. And and my parents were together for, their whole lives and were wonderful inspiration. I'm a reporter in many ways. My dad was a GI fighting the Nazis and almost lost his life in war. And came back with a very profound sense of the importance of, that standing up. But he said, if I could do it all over again, I would have rather been one of Murrow's boys covering it. And I think that had a real profound, Murrow has, my sort of the idol for me throughout my life. And my dad saying that, I think, really set me on a course. Is like, I don't want to be one of those trench coat wearing guys who's on the front line. And, have had some success at it, some failure at it. But I think that was sort of my guiding light. And then my mother was just such a, wonderfully decent person.
Right.
And I don't share any of those attributes. But again, they're aspirational.
I think there are those that would disagree with that.
But yeah, I had great parents and wonderful parents.
And how ironic that your father would use that name of Murrow, and years later you would be bestowed with one of the greatest honors in journalism.
Yeah. I'm very proud of the Murrow. I got two Murrows, and both of them for the same sort of body of work at different times. But yeah, that's very meaningful. And I had a teacher at Columbia University when I was studying journalism, and he had been the film editor for Edward R. Murrow in the early days of CBS, where they were basically creating what is television. And he was a little chain-smoking old guy who cut film for Murrow, and very knowledgeable man. And he told me one day the most valuable piece of information or advice I've ever been given in television. And he says, you want to make good TV, kid? Always make sure the crew gets lunch. And it has been the most valuable. Honestly, take care of the people, and especially doing what we're doing, running around and you're broadcasting, and you see it the same thing. The people who take care of you are your family, and this said to me, the camera guys, those are the guys I love. Those are the people I'm closest to, and it's I owe so much of my career to those guys who did the heavy lifting.
Right. Saul, you remember that? Did you hear that, Saul? Make sure the crew always has lunch.
Make sure the boss takes care of you. Yeah.
But, could you have imagined as a 9-year-old shooting that non-speaking part that all those years later you go from looking into the camera to looking into the eyes of killers, Richard Ramirez, O.J. Simpson. I mean, as I said, you were a part of American news history in a period of time that was unfathomable.
Yeah, it was. I have always looked at reading, and it's the Lou Gehrig thing. I'm the luckiest guy in the world because, and much of it was luck. I was at precisely the wrong place at the very right time. With OJ, and then interacting with some of the serial killers like Richard Ramirez, getting hooked up with his girlfriends who got me into interview the Night Stalker. And what I just feel like serendipitously, I have been so fortunate to be at the right place, and it really is dumb luck in many ways.
Take us back to those early days, because it wasn't news reporting as many people would see it. You were the LA bureau chief.
We were the
a wildly popular show.
Yeah, we were television's bad boys for when Current Affair came on. I don't know if people even remember the show, The Flying Triangle, and Maury Povich.
The sound effect, I'm sure they remember.
Well, the word is, a little TV history, the word is they made that sound effect by taking an old-fashioned paper cutter and a golf swing, and they put it through a synthesizer, and they came up with the ka-chung, as we called it. A little piece of TV trivia for you.
Only in Hollywood, all the sound effects, the way that you can
and old day old day sound effects. But there's a startup show, Current Affair, and it was Rupert Murdoch's Fox. Their first effort at news, when Murdoch was sort of buying up TV stations and creating what was then the fledgling Fox network.
Right.
And this was their first venture into news, and it was this wildly tabloid show, A Current Affair. And the mainstream media really was like, oh my God, these guys just plugging our nose, and these guys are going to give us a bad name. And much of it was silly and nonsensical. And I did some of the worst work I've ever done, but on the it got better, and it allowed, I think I did some of the best work I'd ever done there. So it was a mixed bag, but we changed the face of American television, because in watching OJ and Tanya Harding, Heidi Fleiss, the Hollywood Madam, over the course of time, we were all in on these stories, and we watched the network say, you know what, we can't resist.
Right.
We got to get in. And by Tanya Harding in Portland, that's where I think they gave up any pretense. They were all in on this quintessentially tabloid story. I'm doing live shots for Current Affair next to Connie Chung, who's doing it for CBS. And I thought, you know what? They may not like us, but they have accepted the sort of the reality of the audience.
Was there ever a point early on, because I'm sure you felt like in many ways you were kind of riding that line, and you're hearing from these, well-respected news people.
People who I admired a great deal. Yeah. Listen, it was it is still sort of an unsettled chapter in my life, what you did. And some stuff I was really proud of, and some stuff was just, really, really no socially redeeming qualities.
Part of the job.
Well, and I say that in retrospect as sort of an old man that does have some regrets.
Sure.
And won't lie about it. But for the most part, you have a quote on your sort of page of your email from Senator John Glenn that talks about, if there is any real value in life, it is being involved in something greater than yourself.
Right. And
I think some of us come to that realization, hard-earned and as old men. But so you can reflect and think, some of the stuff was very valuable that we did, and some of it was just, not so much.
Right. Well, look, as we've all, encountered in our life, there will be mistakes made. It's acknowledging those and then learning from it, and then being able to, hopefully dispense that wisdom and information.
So critical. And hopefully being surrounded by people who will let you make a mistake. I go back and look at my early live shots. Very embarrassing. I don't know about you. You probably came out of the blocks as a great broadcaster. But
no,
I look at myself, early thing, and I say, oh my God, I can't believe they let that kid on television. But you live and you learn. And if they don't fire you, hopefully you get better.
Right. You remember your first, news story?
The very first one, I was in radio for a number of years, but the first big television story was this, something that I remember just before Christmas, there was a catastrophic mine disaster in a little town in Utah, and 48 miners were trapped. 28 miners were trapped inside this burning hole. And we went down to cover basically a coal miner's Christmas, and it'll still break me up. Because, all of them, they fought valiantly to get them out, but they lost every one of them. And the devastation that you see in a community like that, it's interesting. my daughter and I went to a hearing about a murder that happened 25 years ago, just this last week, or something that sort of bubbled up in the news again. And it's amazing how for me, many of those stories are as fresh today as they were in the moment I was living them.
Well, yeah, it has a profound impact on you. I recall back when I was interning, back when I was going to Pittsburgh State University, go Gorillas, round 2 of the playoffs.
There we go.
Got to give them the shout out.
Yep.
But as an intern, I was following news crews, and one of my first stories that I went on was a terrible automobile accident, and there were multiple fatalities, and I saw one, and it impacted me in ways that I knew I didn't want any part of. And
you can see it in your mind right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. When you look back at those days when those big stories started to come up, it almost feels like when I look back in thinking about your work, both that I saw here in Phoenix, it almost feels like through sheer osmosis, I don't know how much time you spent in listening to your father talking, watching in trials or anything like that. But it feels like in many ways you were representing your father, not necessarily as an attorney, but just through the way you communicated with people.
If I hope that's the case, I never really, maybe. I would, again, aspirational figures in my life, and I don't profess to have the same strengths, but there's definitely impacted by a mother and a father, and then my family. I reference PTSD in this book, and I think that, and I'm reading a reporter friends of mine's analysis of how it has affected other people who spend their lives focusing on this kind of story. And I'm very grateful that I had a really fairly normal family. I got a wife and 2 children and tried to make it home. One of the reasons I got out of the tabloid business when we moved here was I just didn't want to be on the road that much. And
Right.
you know this, that juggling that and having a family. If I would have stayed in LA and stayed in the sort of tabloid business, I'd be an alcoholic. My kids would hate me. My wife would be have divorced me a lot of times. And so, I came here and was able to really have a family that I could go home and turn some of this off. And that was very important.
And talk about the role of your wife, because she's got acting chops.
No, she's a way better actor. Yeah, and she's been doing this forever. She was a beautiful model when and still is a beautiful woman. But she was a fairly successful model and actress who did, whatever you do it in showbiz. And she was doing a lot of that and has continued to, stay involved. She still performs. So I tell people our family, we're not the traditional family. We're really more of a circus troupe. And if you don't perform, you're not really upholding your responsibilities. And I tell my kids that frequently.
Yeah, 2 kids.
2 kids. Yeah.
Your daughter Dylan's kind enough to join us here in the studio. We'll talk more about your projects that you've got going on. What was it, do you think, that allowed you to connect with those people, the Ramirez's, again, a whole litany of folks, the Heidi Flight? What was it, do you think, that allowed you to connect with them the way that you did? Because it feels as though you were able to bring them into a portal, or vice versa, that few, if any others, could.
Well, it was a greater and lesser success depending on I look back at the Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker interview, which is probably the most famous. So it's 6 million views on YouTube. And I look at that as one of my worst interviews ever. And I learned a great deal because I went in, and this is a danger. You get too attached to a story, you get too involved in a story. And I went in angry. I was not, and Richard
had lost all objectivity.
Well, he's a real character, and a fascinating study. Not to put the focus on him, but I had established that we were going to get this jailhouse interview through one of his many girlfriends who were outside this jail fighting with each other to get in to see him.
Which that in of itself is still such a mind-blowing.
Yeah, a circus. But beyond that, we'd agreed to this interview, and I said, before I sit down with this guy, I want to talk to one of his victims. And we found a man who had been shot in the head during a home invasion. His fiancée brutally raped by this guy. And this guy was left, badly disabled with a bullet in his head. And I was so moved by his strength that I sort of went in pissed off. And I'd seen what Ramirez had behind the smug, Satan-worshipping, sort of charismatic, I guess in some circles, sexy figure. He'd really committed some just awful atrocities. And I'd met this guy at Bill Carnes, who's one of the last attack that Ramirez committed. And going in fired up by the suffering and what this victim had gone through, I wanted to throw down with Ramirez. So we're sitting in this little table, and the big gangly, Night Stalker as soon as he sits down, he has this sort of manifesto. I could have asked him anything, and he had it in bullet points. He was going to read me a sermon. So that sort of ticked me off too. So I look at that as showing that I was sort of out of control. I wanted to jump across the table and punch him in the face. Right. I'm not going to lie. And he probably felt the same about me. And so it was combative, and people, it's interesting, I guess. Somebody took that script, just that raw interview, and made a mini movie of it with two actors, one playing me and one playing Ramirez. I mean, it has sort of taken on a life of its own. But again, it shows young reporters, don't leave your passions. I could have done a better interview with him if I'd not gone in angry. But it ended up being sort of a feisty affair. So I think it was entertaining. But I could have done a better job.
Do you wonder now, in looking back at those interviews, especially considering even the traction that they get today, like social media did not exist?
Ooh, yeah, thank goodness.
When you,
some of those things are better forgotten.
Yeah, yes and no. And this becomes kind of the yin and yang of social media. There really is so much that can be good and positive about it.
For sure.
Flip side, it can be very ugly,
nefarious,
and toxic, and
dangerous.
But do you ever think sometimes, like, where could this have gone, and maybe who could I have reached quicker had there been a Twitter or an Instagram or a TikTok, a Snapchat? Am I leaving any out?
Yeah, we're consulting all the young people in the audience.
Right.
Sure. Sure. I remember most of my career was with a legal pad and a pen, and then I remember the introduction of the big a cell phone. These are just to communicate, not to broadcast.
Yeah. The cell phone, the giant brick.
Driving down the Santa Monica Freeway early one morning, and thank God we had this thing. We were headed to an early interview for a current affairs, hazy out, racing towards Santa Monica. I get this frantic phone call. OJ's girlfriend or wife just got killed. Brick phone this big, get off the freeway and get over to this Bundy address. And, it was the start of and I just looked at technology even then. And I remember that moment I'm holding this thing up to my ear. It was like a cinder block and being dispatched for the first moment to go cover what, played out to be the trial of the century.
Yeah. And as you get that call, your mind has to be almost going in two different directions, and then you hear the name O.J. Simpson that's attached to this, and it's like
and the initial call was funny because this was a great source, guy that worked in our New York office, but he didn't know who it was. I mean, he just said there's a guy, and either it's O.J.'s girlfriend or his wife, or his details were, but he knew that it happened, and he knew it was linked to O.J. And so, we went piling off the freeway. And the point of that story is we were lucky, again, just lucky serendipitously. We were already headed in that direction and just had to pull off the freeway and pulled up at the crime scene. And, and then the story started. I remember Marcia Clark showing up at the crime scene and ducking under the crime tape. When she first was obviously handed the case, this was within hours of, the bodies being discovered. It's just, I look back and just thinking, it is history, and it's really a part of Americana, and I'm just grateful that I had sort of a seat in the peanut gallery.
Right. You shared an account in the book, and again, we'll hold this up for you, and we'll share some more details. But you shared an account in the book too, again, because you've had so many. I guess chilling, the best way to describe it, was some of the encounters you've had, but with OJ and the eyes.
Well, it was the fall. It was just hours after that. OJ. If people who are history buffs remember, he had gotten on an airplane to Chicago in the middle of the night, and the prosecutors would tell you he committed the murders, then got on that flight and went back to Chicago. So by the time the story is breaking, OJ is in Chicago, and LAPD are letting him know, you need to come back and talk to us. So we're in the first couple of hours, we're at the crime scene in front of Nicole's condo, race over, and suddenly OJ's Rockingham estate is suddenly, the setting of the drama that is about to unfold. And then we got word that OJ's coming back voluntarily, so we raced down to Parker Center. This was a long day, and by the time we got there, a couple of crews suddenly started building up, and we got word that OJ was already inside talking to LAPD. And we waited and we waited and we waited, and finally his famous attorney, Howard Weitzman, one very famous LA attorney, sort of breaks through the doors and says, OJ's going to come out, not going to say anything. And it was really sort of a diversion, blocking back. Suddenly OJ's out the door, and he's just headed for a car in the parking lot. And there's by now a gaggle of people, like, dogs like me around there. And he walks out, and OJ, what's any comment, anything? And my regret of that moment, as I write in the book, is that I think OJ had sort of the celebrity discounted then. None of us in those early moments wanted to believe the guy who ran through the airports and sold us, the juice, the guy
Right.
that we loved, was capable of this. And I don't believe any one of us old hard-nosed reporters threw the immediate hardball at OJ, did you kill him? And, I don't think there would have been a Perry Mason moment there where a confession, but it was so telling. OJ was terrified. He'd just come out. Suddenly he knew he was going to be charged. He was released at this point prior to this slow speed chase. And he was a little boy who was in deep trouble,
Right.
A child, and it had that look in his face. And I wish that one of us had thrown him the hardball just to see how OJ reacted.
But it really does speak to where, as much as I think any of us try in those situations to be objective, to be focused, to be professional, you can't help, as you say, kind of trace back to
right.
your memories of this guy running through NFL defenses, running through the airport and commercials.
Yeah. And his acting career, it is. Yeah, I mean, OJ was as significant a feature in sort of American culture of the time as you could get. So it was a horrible case, and it, became quite close to Fred Goldman over the years, and became friends with Nicole's sister, who continued advocacy for many years, and heartbreak. Again, we were at a trial for a murder 25 years ago, and listening to what we heard in court just the other day here in Phoenix, it just an act like that never ends, and the rippling effects of the trauma inflicted on the loved ones, from the killer to the victims. I mean, it just an act of violence, something like that, just tears people apart for a long time.
Yeah.
Never really ends.
Right. It's this constant ripple that, the pebble that almost gets thrown on a weekly, daily basis.
Just will not stop.
So after a current affair...
got canned from a current affair, got fired.
The market changed.
Yep.
You find yourself here in Phoenix.
Right.
And thinking, you're going to be an investigative journalist. I mean, what's the worst story that I'll cover? And boy,
the AZ produced there.
It did.
Yeah, this has been a great run, and just a lot of different stories. And when they thank God, the guys that hired me at Channel 3, they were wonderful people, Dennis and Phil, and they had created sort of this environment that they wanted people to come in and sort of be yourself. My concern is by that time I'd had sort of such a nasty reputation. I'm thinking that what these guys are going to come in and say, we loved you then, but we got to change you for us,
Right.
as they do frequently in the media. But these guys let me run wild. And I owe them, they just, no, I shouldn't say it that way. They really allowed me to go after stuff that I wanted to go after. And
Well,
never,
utilize your strengths rather than trying to harness what.
yeah, and that's takes some courage on a corporation's part to let sort of a wild man like me, do my thing.
Right.
And I and I respect very much. And it's always been such a good relationship.
Do you remember your first? And I'm guessing the answer is an obvious yes, but your first encounter with the toughest sheriff in America?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. When I first came here, Sheriff Arpaio was really at the sort of apex and ascending to his popularity. And early on, I think he sort of knew my past, and he really wanted me to be his friend. He went out of his way to sort of bring reporters that he wanted to tell his stories close to him. And so suddenly, his people are feeding me lots of stories and asking me to do all these kind of things, and it got a little too familiar for my comfort, and I sort of had to put a stop to that.
Right.
And I think I ended up being there. I've been recognized with a couple of awards, and I'm grateful for those. But honestly, the things that I am most proud of at the end of the day is that I ended up on Joe Arpaio's number one on his enemies list, and I ended up number one on Warren Jeff's hit list. And I think you're defined by your friends and your enemies. And I think that Arpaio hated my guts, and it ended up that kind of relationship.
Right. You mentioned Warren Jeff, so that leads me to the next question. I mean, who would have known that spending your time here in the Valley as an investigative reporter, the different stories that you covered, that the biggest story, and in many ways still continues to be the biggest story, is in an area where you grew up, not too far from.
Right.
And your role in helping uncover something that is so insidious and impactful on so many lives. Just take us back to those early days when you first started hearing some of the rumors and the rumblings, and how you were able to, in many ways, like a tug of war, through your dogged reporting and information, helped launch this investigation that took down this incredible, just an evil man.
Yeah, Mr. Jeffs.
Yes.
People ask me why I got involved in this, and with some frequency. And really, I was born sort of into this. I mean, I grew up in Utah. My wife and I were both raised in the Mormon Church, and both of us have ancestors who were polygamous. So and as a child, I could have gotten on my bike from one of my family home and driven 10 minutes and shown you a cluster of homes that everybody in the neighborhood knew were as a practicing polygamous family. This is sort of part of the secret hiding in plain sight throughout Utah. So to those of us who grew up there, this is nothing new. But I became aware that in the larger communities, in most of these communities, there is really a systematic abuse and control of women and girls, women and children. And in the larger groups, to sustain an industrial level kind of polygamy as they have in Short Creek with Warren Jeff, you have to have complete control over the women and the children. And it's a bad situation, but I sort of grew up knowing this, and probably passed through Short Creek growing up in Salt Lake, going down and vacationing in southern Utah, passed through there multiple times when I was a child, and always knew that there was more to it. And my feeling is, and again, having the knowledge that I have, this may be unfair, but I'm surprised that other people weren't aware of it. I mean, I knew that Warren Jeffs was abusing children before I heard the audio tapes in the Texas trial of him raping a little girl and recording it.
Right.
And it shocks me that, his followers, some of his most devout followers, some of his big bodyguards, well, we didn't know, I'm further removed, and I knew, and so it's a little disingenuous, but like I say, it has always been sort of hiding in plain sight, and the abuses of Mr. Jeffs. He is an example of power corrupts and power, absolute power. He became Teflon. Nobody would do anything, and with progressive leaders, it became worse and worse because Warren Jeff, by his time, he knew they were never going to come after me, and I've now built 2 towns where I have the municipal governments, protecting me,
right.
The cops, the utilities. I mean, it was the most well-established cult in America for a long time until they finally took control after a federal court ruling here. But for me, it was it's obvious. Why aren't other people? When I started doing this, it's like, why aren't more people following? Why aren't more people picking up on this story? And it took some time, and it took the courageous, crusaders early on, and what I refer to as the polygamist Underground Railroad. That I think I helped establish, and these crusaders bringing young people out. We find them, tell their stories, confront the perps, and then lay it in the cop's lap. And I thought, we do a couple of these, they're going to get active. It just took a lot longer than I thought.
Yeah, and that's the story when I think about social media,
that could have helped,
and the ability to accelerate that to have that there on a daily, almost an hourly basis.
Yeah, because we do one of these stories, and then one of the networks would drop in every 2 years and do some sort of thing, and it makes it sound like it's just a moment in time. And to the extent my daughter and I have been working on this story, it's just given my history, it's like I think my role is to connect the dots. Because these are not just isolated incidents in one range.
Right.
This is part of a long history of abuse that will continue if it remains in the shadows.
How did that impact you personally? I mean, again, you'd seen and encountered so many different things. Talking about Richard Ramirez sitting in that jail cell, but when you were talking about women and children and being a husband and a father, how did that impact you, and how did you try to, if you were able to kind of compartmentalize it?
My daughter and I were having this discussion just the other day, and I don't know if I've done it. I feel in many ways at my age, I feel like I spend too much time, going back and delving into these stories in my own mind. And I don't know if that's a good thing, but it definitely had an impact. But I don't think you can throw yourself into something unless you have some passion. And if you don't have some passion, you're probably not paying any price.
Right.
And, so I don't have any regrets about this, but there's no doubt, I can see some of the first young ladies that, we encountered who were running, and they're terrified little faces in safe houses. And, and some of the crusaders who stepped up and risked. I told stories and got paid for it. There were a handful of brave women who got out of there and risked everything to try to help make sure that what happened to them did not happen to their little brothers and sisters. And they've always been the hero. I really, when we talk about this, I feel like I have to premise the story always that, people want to credit me for whatever I have done. And I only told stories about really brave people. And again, Warren may have put a hit out on me, but I've never lost an ounce of sleep over that. That's not any worry for me. These people, these women primarily got out and just said, hell no, we're going to put a stop to this. And they deserve all the credit.
Yeah, and you'd said he not only put a hit on you, but in some ways, beyond putting a hit on you, what I found in some of the excerpts in reading from the book and the magazine articles is that he and his circle tried to put a curse on you. And to me, that almost feels like more impactful internally. How did you wrestle with that?
Well, I know these guys.
Okay.
And they don't, I know these guys, and it makes me laugh more than it makes me scared.
To think that, yeah.
So, I watch with great interest when other reporters have sort of dropped into this story, and they go talk about people chasing them around and guys in trucks, spinning gravel at them and everything. That has happened to me a handful of times, but most of the times when I went up there, it seemed like the town cleared out. I couldn't find people to talk to. Over the years, apparently there was a very extensive network of surveillance cameras and security. And in a deposition in a lawsuit, one of the town workers said that they had installed a security wall because they wanted to keep Mike Watkiss out. And apparently, so I always look at that as my contribution to the infrastructure of Colorado City.
Mike Watkiss security.
Yeah, as you go, and so I honestly think they became very sophisticated about knowing who was in and out, coming in and out of town. And I think they went after some reporters, and they realized that it just wasn't going to work for me. I'd go into the town offices begging for somebody to come confront me, and usually couldn't find anybody.
You talked about the role of your family, your wife, especially when you were in the thick of it, having 2 young children. How did she help you on a deal? Because again, you're dealing with some very dark, ugly stuff. What was her role? How did you as a couple try to help navigate that? Because I would imagine it. A lot of nights you're coming home and
A little freaked out.
having seen a lot of dark stuff, heard a lot of dark stuff.
Hope I didn't. She's definitely my North Star, my guiding light, and certainly having her history and knowledge of sort of the Utah culture to a much greater, in many ways, much greater extent, the theology and understanding of that has been. I wouldn't have done any of this stuff without her. I wouldn't be alive without my wife and my family. There's no question about it. I'm sufficiently self-destructive. And the thing about it is she didn't tolerate the best thing, you tolerate the not, she wanted, we get on, we got a life in the most loving way, and we got kids. And I think that's healthy to just come home. It's like, you know what, leave the ego and the angst at the door.
Right.
We got a life to live.
Just be dad.
Yeah,
be dad, be husband.
and that's, I think that's, I don't know if I compartmentalize it well. I'll let the
Daughter Dylan's over here with a little wry smile. We might have to have her on next. Well, let's talk about. We'll kind of lighten up the mood here because this is the one that I still absolutely love. Back to the current affair days, and as we said, in acting. So, longtime journalist, award-winning journalist, author, and actor. And who knew that it would be the gift that keeps on giving. And if you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, just if you've not seen it recently, go pull up Dumb and Dumber. Because as you look at this face,
changed a little bit.
Changed just a little bit. Hair a little bit longer. No trench coat.
Yeah, so that was my Murrow days.
that was the Murrow look. But I'll share with you here from the line in Dumber and Dumber, from which he's received countless residual checks. We said the gift that keeps on giving. Next up on A Current Affair, the heartbreaking story of the little blind Rhode Island boy who was duped into buying a dead parakeet.
And I tell my children, whatever I do in my life, that is the 30 seconds I will forever best be remembered for. And it was great fun.
How did that role come about?
One of the PR agents at Current Affair who did all the publicity for the show. I was in L.A. working as the bureau chief at the time, and she said, "How'd you like to be in a movie?" And I said, "What is it?" And she says, "Well, it's with Jim Carrey and Jeff Daniels. Daniels I knew, and Carrey I shared an office with for months because he was working on the TV show A Living Color, and I used to stand in a coffee truck every morning waiting to get coffee with those guys. So I thought, okay, sure. As soon as she said a movie, I said, sure, I'm in.
Right.
And I'm glad I did. And I was based in Salt Lake, but we actually shot the scene in Salt Lake, so I got to go home and see my mom and go see a jazz game. And then we shot that scene, and it has become a comedy classic. Those few lines.
It's not only the gift that keeps on giving, it's the movie that just keeps on giving. I mean, it is one of those movies, I will say, that regardless of time of day, if you're flipping through, you're like, oh, okay, I'm in it.
Yes, and you flip it through, and 9 times out of 10, it's on. It's the kind of movie it must have gone out of whatever. They can run it a lot because there are periods of time when I'll go in and it's on 4 to 5 times in a week. But thank God to the Farley brothers and to Jeff and Jim, I do still get residual checks from that thing 25 years after the fact.
He continues to say thank you, and thank you. So beyond the 9-year-old non-speaking part,
Yeah.
was that the first then foray into?
No, I had done
Okay.
a film with Tommy Lee Jones. Yeah, it was cool. It was a lousy film, but one of the slow moments in Tommy's career. But a little TV movie, and I played this was when I was reporting in Salt Lake City, and they needed a reporter. I'm looking that as I get older, I'm trying to branch out and grow as an actor and not play a reporter anymore. That's in many ways that's why I grew the hair and the mustache. They can't cast me as a reporter anymore.
Right.
But no, it was great fun, and we shot on the steps of the Utah State Capitol. And Tommy Lee Jones is a rancher, and there were a number of very famous actors in it, including an old cowboy actor named Ben Johnson from the movie Shane. If you remember that. And so it was sort of a hip Hollywood moment for me. The one time I was in camera with 2 Academy Award winners. So for me, it was a big moment.
Understandably so.
Yeah.
So you retired from the news industry in 2018, but the acting bug is real. Like it is something that you really tried to throw yourself into.
Bug is too mild. It's an obsession. It's a full blown.
Yeah.
I think people who enjoy performance, it's a curse. That's what it is. It's not a bug. It's a curse. But I still do it. And I've done some films that have been really good, and some that have been abject train wrecks that I hope people never see. But I enjoy it very much.
But it was funny. I was reading too, where you'd said that even though you're since retired, you were and probably will always be this rambunctious, hyperactive kid.
Yeah,
and that's part of what kind of fuels that, right?
And that's why I love my family. They sort of put up with that. Yeah. I'm hyperactive. I'm ADD. I'm dyslexic. I'm the whole gamut of things that could have gotten me in a lot of trouble. And thank God I found a profession that paid me to have adventures and a family that has not thrown me out yet.
Well, let's talk more about the family and more about the most recent project that you are taking part in with your daughter, Dylan. And, oh, by the way, just, grabbed an Emmy, but, just another award for this multi-time Murrow Award winner. How, the easy word is, like, how special is that to get to share your passion? And clearly it's something that she has gravitated to for a while now, but to get to be a part of that now on a daily basis.
In a word, priceless.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's working with my daughter on some projects that I think are actually significant and we can make a contribution to work with her on that and to learn from her, and just have the energy and insight of a world that, have working on these issues, particularly, on the women and children issues, working on those with my daughter. I can't put it into words. It's been great. And coming out of I really wanted to have this behind me, but I thought we were confronted with some stories, and I thought we can still make a difference, and to do it with her, I couldn't pass that up.
Right, and if you can, just detail for the audience, like where they can find the show, the information.
Yeah, well, when they published, I got retired, tried to get that book out, and my daughter and I toyed with the idea, well, let's just talk about some of the serial killers, the old stories. And so we started doing a YouTube channel, Story Hustler, the YouTube channel. But it completely changed about 2 years ago when this Netflix doc called Keep Sweet, Pray and Obey dropped, which was a big deal. It certainly brought that issue back. And suddenly I got 2 phone calls from basically one woman who said, she was somebody I'd known throughout this struggle, and she said, we need help. We got a missing child. And, and I just, that was...
Tug at the heartstrings.
Well, it was the Al Pacino moment.
Right.
It was just pulling me back in. And,
right.
I want, if I can help, and I think we have helped with that. And then another guy who's sort of now in the headlines because he's a sort of a renegade prophet causing all kinds of problems and accused of all kinds of terrible abuses against children. For whatever reason, he sort of insisted on reaching out to me before he got busted. So we have this one guy, a guy named Sam Bateman, who's going to go on trial for horrible crimes. And for some reason, he needed to come sort of impress me. And so I got to know him before he broke in the headlines, and now he's accused of all kinds of things. And the second frame to that story is the bigger deal that, Warren Jeffs and the FLDS community have sort of put out a need to gather up children because we're going to start doing the marriages again. And as soon as that revelation came out, in short order, children started disappearing. And that's the story that is really important, and that's what pulled us back in. And to do it with my daughter,
yeah, like you
amazing.
Say, can't put a price on it. What advice would you give in getting to work with your daughter, who is in that demographic of young, aspiring journalists who are struggling, I think, probably with a lot of what they see on mainstream news, seeing on social media platforms. We talk about the yin and the yang, the good and the bad. But what advice would you share with those who really do want to do good news, good reporting, good journalism?
Well, I think that there are a couple of fundamental things. I mean, tell the truth. Always pursue the truth. And one of those other old cliches that is so meaningful, you got to have fire in the belly. Pursue the truth, have the fire in the belly. Unfortunately, I feel it's utterly inadequate to advise young people on how to navigate in this world because there is this proliferation, this vomiting forth of too much, and there's no vetting on most of it.
Right.
And how you navigate that, I don't know. But I'm hopefully, if you're looking for reporters, try to find someone who seems hell bent on being straight and telling you the truth, and seems to have some passion for pursuing and going after that story. Those are guidelines to viewers, and again, that's so inadequate. Because it really is a confusing time with being bombarded with too much information. The dynamics of so many of the national and international stories. You see the use of disinformation. It's hard.
Right.
I'm more about it than
no
I
easy
do.
answer, really.
Yeah, not that I know of.
Yeah. So you've dealt with all of these ugly, challenging stories throughout your career. Was the love and passion of sports, kind of being a sports junkie, was that your release?
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm just, I'm a little sawed-off guy, but I have been a pro basketball fan. Growing up in Utah and watching the Utah Stars led by Zelmo Beatty winning the ABA championship. Well, I got one of the championship 7 games. I went to the Salt Palace and watched with my dad.
Right.
So, love those guys. And then, they brought the Jazz in and Maravich and Adrian Dantley and, Willie Wise and just Griffith, just great players. And so, I'm a student of the game. My daughter and my son have both played. My daughter went and played, throughout college and then played a year in Europe. So we are complete junkies. And that's why I say, you and Eddie and Ann and the Toms, I mean, it's like it's just a part of the family.
Well, it's always enjoyable hearing from you and any of our viewers and listeners, getting a chance where they say, I see you, I say hi to you all the time, but I don't hear anything back. But I know you're there, and I know you feel it.
I'm old enough now that and was here long enough that I now have young people in their 20s, probably 30s now. And they'll come up to me and they say, I grew up watching you. Nicest thing I can imagine.
Right.
I mean, really the most flattering. First of all, they let me into their home.
Right.
My parents watched you all the time, Doesn't happen all the time. Probably happens to you way more than it does to me. But those are the moments. And it's like, wow, I couldn't ask for anything more. That they let me in, not once, but a spicy guy like me, they let me in more than once.
Right.
I'm so grateful.
You were described as a grizzled TV icon by the Arizona Republic a few years ago.
I've only gotten worse.
More grizzled.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that we love to do here on Breakthrough Chronicles is provide our guests an opportunity to share their passions, their causes, their charities. We call it the Pay It Forward segment. So with that, I'll turn the floor over to you. If there is something that you support that you would like to bring attention to, we'd love to help promote it.
Well, I would just say there's always ongoing issues. And with this trial that I mentioned, my daughter and I were in, domestic violence is always an issue. And there's a number of good organizations here. We're talking about a case where a mom lost her daughter and was also shot in a domestic violence. Set up a place called Cassie's House. I'm not sure it's still, but these are the times of year when we want to tell ourselves that we're thinking about people who are in need, but there's just a lot of them. So domestic violence and the abuse of women and children globally. Watching on something on CNN last night about what's going on in the Sudan.
Right.
There's just a lot of suffering in the world, and as an old man, and this is another sort of insight of being a grizzled old man. You really do become grateful for what you have.
Yeah.
And how nice, and sometimes feel some degree of guilt about that. And I think there is an obligation to involve yourself in something greater than yourself.
Right.
As your quote said.
Before we get out of here, next film stuff, next acting gig. What are you working on right now? What should be looking out for?
I'm waiting for my role. I'm waiting for my Casablanca. I'm waiting. I would like to make one great film. Dumb and Dumber certainly was a blockbuster, made a lot of money, and people know it. And a couple of whatever. I'm an actor. I will. Actors want to act.
Right.
And this strike has certainly put a damper on it. But Arizona is apparently saying they're going to get back in the film industry. There's more money coming in. I've heard that for a long time. I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah.
But so it's all hopeful. And right now, my daughter and I are really involved in the YouTube channel Story Hustler, and hoping. And we're working on some longer. The one documentary I did was 19 years ago, Colorado City and the Underground Railroad, and that represented about 20 years of work then, and 20 years have passed. So we think maybe we're going to put together
maybe time
an
for
update of the Underground Railroad, Colorado City and the Underground Railroad.
All right. Check out the YouTube channel. Go pick up the book.
Not for everybody. Mature audiences.
Mature audiences only. Story Hustler, Murder, Mayhem, PTSD.
Terrific to see you, my friend.
Thank you so much. What an absolute pleasure and an honor to have you sitting here. And daughter Dylan.
My bodyguard.
Right.
And executive producer.
He said he's bringing in the bodyguard. I'm like, hey, you can bring in whoever you need to. So
security.
Great to see you.
Likewise.
Mike Watkiss, a pleasure spending time with him on Breakthrough Chronicles.